punching.
Yeah.
I think the thing is that the punching and the kicking takes your mind off the fact that you're exercising. So it's kind of like...
All right. Vayas Moshe nechash nechash. We should tag some friends. And let's see who else. Okay, that's enough. The shul at the shul. All right. Vayas Moshe nechash nechash. What do we learn in this week's parsha? At a certain point, Hashem was disappointed enough that serpents were sent out to the people, and Hashem said to Moshe to make a serpent and to place it high up. Yeah, nes, you know, Orim Nisi. Vayas Moshe nechash nechash. He did so. He made a serpent. Vayisimei hanes. V'hoya im noshach hanachash as ish. If the serpent bit someone, v'hibit al nechash hanachoshes v'choy, and he would look out at this copper serpent and he would live. So the Mishnah says in Rosh Hashanah regarding this story that bizman she Yisrael mistaklin klape mato, klape mailo, when the Yidden look heavenward, umishabdim es livam lavim shebashamayim, and they bind their hearts to Hashem, so then they're healed. So the Alter Rebbe asks many questions here. The Tzemach Tzedek adds many questions. V'kosha lomalei lenachash klal. Why is there a need for this model serpent, or whatever this? What would we call it? A sculpted serpent. So you have kavana, you look heavenward, and that's enough. Another question, mahu hahistaklus klape maila. In general, what kind of thing is this to look upwards? It says in Shulchan Aruch that when a person davens Shemona Esrei, they should be humble, they should look downwards. Halei mevur be'inyan tefillah, it says about davening, sheyu einav lamata. And now we're saying einav lamaila. Ve'libay lamaila. Your heart should be heavenward, but your eyes should be downward. Olahavinzeh. This Maimer, we know that one of the subjects, one of the topics in Hasidus is about how a person should view negative things that happen to them. In the Maamorim of the Rabbeim that discuss this Maimer, they introduce the idea of tikkun and toihu, or katnus and gadlus. When a person is in a person's state of katnus, a small-minded person, when they experience something, it's difficult for them to see beyond what they're experiencing. But a broad-minded person, should be able to see beyond, should be able to be, right? So the Alter Rebbe is going to discuss this in multiple levels, and this is going to be the answer to the question about klape maila. The Alter Rebbe is going to explain that when the Mishnah says that we should look towards maila, it doesn't mean to look towards heaven. What it means is to look at things from their source. In other words, what's the intention of the person causing you this challenge? Okay? Why is this being done to you? So that's where the Alter Rebbe is going to go. That's one aspect. Another aspect that the Alter Rebbe is going to speak about within this context is about our avodah with our guf. Why? What's the purpose? Why did Hashem tie our neshama to a body? The neshama is such an incredible being. It's so special.
Yeah.
And the body seems to limit it in so many ways. Why? So ulahavin zeh nakdim lacher be'inyin yiridas hanashama be'elam hazeh. So the Alter Rebbe comes to this lachker, right? Lach chakira. How do we say chakira in English? An investigation.
Yeah.
We're going to investigate the purpose of the neshama's descent to this world. In next week's parsha, in Parshas Balak, the Alter Rebbe asks the question, Lama yorda neshama lamata? Why did the neshama come down to this world? And then the Alter Rebbe says, and the vehatirutz ho'amiti, the true answer, right? But here, in other words, tshuva. But here, the Alter Rebbe doesn't use the same language. He doesn't say, why did the neshama come down to this world? He said, let's investigate the inyan of Yiridas HaNeshama Ba'elam Hazeh. Ki ikar tachlisai. The main purpose of its descent into this world, meaning, the word purpose is wrong, right? When you say tachlis, what do we mean when we say tachlis? When you tell someone, no, it's time to think about tachlis.
Ultimate purpose.
The
two words in one.
But in other words, what would we want your occupation to be? In other words, not purpose in the existential sense, but practically, what should you be busy with? Right? What should be your occupation? In this world, we do many things. What is the primary occupation of souls in this world? Iker tachlisa is ledavik bekoinu. Is to be close to Hashem. How do we get close to Hashem? Hashem is a spiritual being. To be close to Hashem is through spiritual practice. Be'ava v'yir. In other words, if I have an emotion for Him, that means that He's present in my life. Now, v'ikar hadvekus, at what point in our life are we in true dvekus with Hashem? B'tfilah. Why is that? Shehateva is because davening is full of words. And the words express emotion. Right? Sometimes a person holds in an emotion, but then when someone asks them, I see that something is bothering you, when they start speaking about it, they become overwhelmed. They begin to cry. So davening is full of those words that should cause us to get very emotional about Hashem. So shehateva is heim yoser kroivim lahavanas ha'adam. They're closer to, right? They make it possible for us to relate. Ubevadai. Now the Alter Rebbe is asking a question. Kodim tzeis haneshama ba'elam hazeh. Before the neshama's excursion into this world, v'gam achar istalkusim min haguf u'mizdabek yoser be'ava v'yir pnimius. Probably before and after this short tkufa in Eilam Hazeh, the dveikus of the neshama and Hashem is much greater. Why? Shehaguf einay manicha ilavidas Hashem. The body gets in the way. Fa'adrab. Not only does it interfere, it's menagid. Machmas chumrei yachriach es haneshama. The neshama is forced leihanes af migufnius. Right? In other words, the neshama is drawn into the mud. Even though the neshama has no interest in all this, what is its desire and will? To be even closer to Hashem, but nevertheless it's forced to experience Gashmiya So'elam. So the Alter Rebbe is here with a question. Why? So if the purpose of life is to be connected to Hashem, before and after we're in a physical body, we're more connected. So why are we connected? So now, someone who's narrow-minded, they can't see, oh, you know what? Maybe the fact that I'm in a guf could help intensify my connection to Hashem. Or maybe to love Hashem in a spiritual world is a kleine kunst. But to love Hashem in a physical world, now that's saying something. You know, like the Rebbe explains why there's a parsha in the Torah on Yisro's name. And the Rebbe says, you know, Yisro is someone who served every idol. When someone like that comes along and says, Ata Yadaiti, there's something to it. You know, he checked out everything else and he's saying, Ata Yadaiti, I know that Hashem is the one. So this requires an elevated, it's a broadened way of thinking. It's a broad perspective that my guf, which gets in the way and interferes with my avodas Hashem, that's actually the impetus. Now let's talk about this mashal in the Zohar for a minute, because the Alter Rebbe is going to bring it here. The Alter Rebbe brings an end of Perek Tes of Tanya. The last few words, he says that the nefesh habamis, the whole Perek Tes, he explains what the nefesh alikis wants. He wants this, he wants that, he wants to conquer the whole body and to fill the heart and the mind and the fine, everything. The hands and the feet. Now, what does the Yetzer Hara want? Exactly the opposite. Why? Like the Mashal HaZoyna of the Zohar HaKodesh. What's the Mashal HaZoyna of the Zohar HaKodesh? The king raises a prince. The prince is very well educated. He's the best teachers, the most exciting teachers, the best subjects. You know, I mean, what do you want? He has the best devices, right? Every time he gets an answer right, ding, 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 ding. I mean, you know, the pots of gold are new. So the king asks himself, if my son were in a different environment, what would be? In other words, he's trying to see, is my son truly good? Right? Is it only the circumstances? Now, that's the same thing for the neshama. For the neshama to be l'mayla serving Hashem, surrounded by malachim, oh, wonderful. But for the neshama to be in a physical guf, that's another story. So here he brings your lashon. V'hine mevur b'zeir. The Zeir says like this: Man deloy maharek medira l'miska. A person who does not transform darkness to light. Leislei chulka b'hai alma klum. He has no chelik in elam haba.
B'hai alma.
It means elam haba. This Zohar is the Zohar that we learn in Perek Yud about Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, when he said, well, who wants to come into my chamber? It's only Merira Lemiska Ad Lo Yesun Hacha. If you didn't, you can't come to my. So Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is already Lamailo,
Okay, so
and he says, welcome Reb Chia. You know, Chia, you could come because you were Mahapach Merira Lemiska.
special mention.
Right, and anyone who wasn't, right? So let's lay chulka. It says Kizek Kol Adam. So Lo Nivra Ela B'Shvil Zeh. Right? Imagine the impact of the Alter Rebbe's words. In other words, we say every morning in davening, we say Al Tevienu Lidei Nisayon. Hashem, don't test me. I want to have smooth sailing in Avodas Hashem. Then the Alter Rebbe comes, he says a Maamar, and the Alter Rebbe says that really the whole purpose of Olam Hazeh is iskafia. It's wow. In other words, the guf, that's why we're here, to overcome. So we're looking for it. She says, Shehadeh, the Vayas Rishon, loy hoyu mispalel in klal. They didn't daven in Vayas Rishon. Why didn't they daven? Because they were able to directly be mahapech the guf. Their iskafia, they didn't need to inspire themselves with avavir. They kept, like the Gemara says, that Talmidei Chachamim would eat later in the day. They continuously controlled, they tamed their guf. They didn't need to remind themselves and daven before and inspire themselves in the morning. You know the famous story that I repeat very often. The Fried in Lubavitch, to daven ba'avoda, you needed a permit. You know, not everyone could daven ba'avoda. To come late to say the nigla, you know, every bacher would like to avoid nigla, but from looking at a siddur for a long time. Anyway, every bacher. And there was a bacher. He had the rishus to daven, and he can't, you know. So Friedrich Rebbe calls him in one time. He says, you know, davening this, but when it comes to learning, we don't recognize in your learning that you're davening in an inspired way. Your learning is ordinary.
Wow.
So he said to the Friedrich Rebbe, it's true that I daven and I get inspired, but between davening and learning, I eat. And when essen is mafsik, the food, once I eat, right? So the Friedrich Rebbe affirmed. He said, yeah, the essen is mafsik. Yeah.
He had an answer.
So he says, "Bevadai kol ha'avoda shalahem lo yehoya ki im al davar zeh." Before, right? That was their whole avoda. Lafich meriru lemiska. Now about the bir. Inyanu ki adinim nimtakim b'shorshem. Let's talk about ki adinim nimtakim b'shorshem for a minute. Okay. I'm just thinking, you know, to give the simple mashal. The simple mashal is, let's say, in the mashal Azayna Shebezoyer HaKadosh, let's say the king called in a woman and gave her this mission. Now, being that she met the king, it's so close to her that she can't really bring herself to really convince the prince to do something wrong. Because
she knows the mission.
And the king is so great.
It's right. It's not. It would be such a.
Your happiness if he will not fail.
Right, but so what happens is the king tells her to appoint someone else and not tell that other person that the king is involved. So now the person on the ground doesn't know that there's something behind, and they're just in it for what's in it. And that's what he's saying here. That, let's say the Eibishter created the Satan. So the Satan knows what's up. He knows that his whole tachlis, not only that, you could say in a certain way, because he knows he can't really get in the way. But the Satan has agents. In the Hishtalshalus, to them, it's just Ra Gomor. That's what the Alter Rebbe is going to use that Lashon. That they become Ragomer. So what does it mean, Ein adinim nimtakin ela b'shoshan, when a person is living in Elam Hazeh and they're experiencing things that are completely evil? The way they look here in this world, they're completely evil. So we're telling him, look at the Shoirish. In other words, the way this is, you're right. You're right that the way this is, it's completely evil. But the origin, what was the original plan of how this, what was the original kavana? The original kavana was toiv. The Shoirish was toiv.
They're not bad, they're just employees for...
And what's that? And what's that? The tachlis of you to strengthen your relationship with the Eibishter.
Even Tanya says they're doing whatever they was told to do, so it's better
right.
than you.
So let's take a look. Ve'inyanu ki adinim nimtakim b'shoshim dihine kol rois v'dinim rachmanu litzlan shenishavu ba'ilam. Just to mention, it's very interesting that a few weeks ago we learned that Maimer about the Meraglim, where the Rebbe speaks about the Shoirish, right? That between Mincha and Ma'ariv, Shabbos afternoon, because in Lekutei Torah here in the back, he's Mitzayin on this Maimer also over there. So for me, it's like 3 weeks in a row that this message, you know, by Koirach, Meraglim, Koirach, and now here, the same Nekudah. You know what I'm talking about? The Rebbe asks, we say that the Meraglim, they were really so great and so but if you read the story in Torah, it doesn't look, you know. So
doesn't look good.
So the Rebbe says that Taka, the way it came down Lamato, they weren't good. But Mitzad the Shoirish, in other words, the way the Alter Rebbe learns Pshat in the Meraglim story, the way Chassidus learns Pshat, is the way, like the spiritual origin of where it came from. But the poil on the ground, they were negative. And then the Rebbe applies this across the board for these few parshas. It's very interesting. To me, it's interesting that it's 1985, such a late date, and the Rebbe makes such a shift. What
shift did he make? He made
that all the positivity is only in the source, actually.
Oh, he used to say it wasn't here, it was on the ground?
That's the way we understood it all the years.
Wow.
You know, I repeat this, you know, so when the rabbis get together, they all talk about, what'd you say, Shabbos, what's your speech, you know. You had a good speech. You could sell it on Achtos. Anyway, so one guy, he would tell me about the Meraglim. He's making fun of, you know, a shliach that gets up with a pleated tie and a green suit, and he's teaching the Rebbe Sicha about the Meraglim. That the Meraglim wanted that we should stay in the Midbar, but really the avodah is that we have to be in the world. And this guy says, I think maybe he could use a little Meraglim. He's a little too heavy, you know, in his Elam Hazeh, you know. So this revolution of that the Meraglim really, they were seeking something spiritual. And then to come and say that that's only the way it is in the Shoresh. Practically, anyway, they were wrong. So the Shoresh of all negativity in this world is good. In Ben Amelech, what does she want? That she shouldn't be obeyed. The king will be so thrilled. That's not the king's desire. V'zeu maimer azal Satan upnino l'shem shamayim niskavnu. So Satan and in other words, in the Shoresh, they want Shem Shamayim niskavnu. In the Shoresh, Pnina wanted Chana to daven for children. But at the end of the day, what she did was cruel. And it was way beyond, and that's why she was punished. And her children were killed. Yeah, that the Satan, in other words, you're telling me that the Satan was l'shem shamayim niskavim with Eoiv. Yeah? But look what happened at the end. And what does it say about the Migdash Rishon? Nasan Einov, he was envious, and he destroyed it. So he did something evil. For Inyanu, the origin of the Ra is Tov. K'mevor b'zeh Hashem. V'chiyesh avda the morid b'morid. Is there any servant that rebels? Hagam sheyesh kama avodim ha'mispartzim eis adineim. Omnam heim basar v'dam. Chayusam nefradim mizeh mizeh. This Chazal is Avdei Hashem. Shemekablim chayusam imeno yizbarich v'hu ha'machayas ha'koil. So eich yesh chayas l'dover shekenegdei. How could Hashem be mechayas something that's in opposition to him? Meshani shuval derech Moshe azayna in ben hamelech. V'zeu davar ha'machayas kol harois. This, every evil in the world, originally, its Shoresh is from Kedusha. Shorshem al-Maila hu-Torah. She'er l'mata, v'ishtalshalos nasa be'emes ra gomur, v'dinim gemurim, heim b'mila de'alma, v'heim b'mila de'shmaya, that people suffer in parnasa, people suffer in health, and people suffer in ruchnias, that they do averis, real ra. V'hinei, shabola, adonezi yisurim nachman al-Itzlan, when a person suffers, Yachshay, he should consider, Kiloi lamara ein of yishbet. Don't look at the surface. Don't look at the facts. Sheirahu. ela be'emes shorshay hu toiv. And this is the idea of meichin de gadlus. Don't get stuck in meichin de katnus. This is also, by the way, one of the themes of the Maamar when the Alter Rebbe spoke about this was also about David HaMelech with Bathsheba. It's also part of the story. Shorshi utev, ki mimenu yizborech v'yiteitzu arois, im rak tev gomen, mitzad Hashem, it's tev. Rak, shu eini musig, bishvil, shlo yuchal leired la'elam ha'shafel, v'nishal ha'mayla, the tev remains l'mayla. Zel nikra, this is called michla dakik. It's a very thin, it's a very fine line of chayis. In other words, the Eibishter gives chayis to the shaydish, and then it's on a thread that it comes down to Elam Hazeh. Shu be'emes chayusi is what? The Eibishter is being mechayah, this davar gashmi. So this is the meaning of b'chol ma'itcha. Right? In other words, you tell a person, I'm saying, let's say a person goes to gamble. So he goes with money. Then he has no money left. So
then it's his shirt.
So one guy, he says, I have no money left. Right? But right, someone else. I got to figure out what else could I do. Can you take my nose? I don't think I need it. Take my arm. When we say b'chol ma'oitcha, we say v'afta Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha. No.
Essential parts. Essential parts.
No, in other words, that I'm giving you what I have. B'chol ma'oitcha, I didn't know that I have more.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When a person suffers, they discover that they had more. That's the b'chol ma'oitcha. Their connection to Hashem is on a deeper level. Like you say in the gym, that you say or other people say, that
No pain, no gain.
If you have someone, the right person pushing you, then you're going to find out you didn't even know that you could do it. That's b'chol ma'itcha. So he says malach hachayim. That's b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshcha. That malach hamoves. You don't even have. Like a person says, he's such a chevraman, he's so industrious, strip him of all his belongings and drop him off in a foreign country and come back in 6 months, he'll be a gvir over there also. Right? He doesn't need any conditions, this, that, he'll figure it out. Give him 2 weeks, he'll be a millionaire. Without stealing. K'maimer toiv me'oid. Toiv ze malach hachayim. Me'oid ze malach hamavos. What's the translation of me'oid? You can't put a measure on me'oid. More than. Shu toiv me'oid b'li shiur ugvu. Hello. Sha'adayin le'bala degili ve'ini musul. We don't realize that we have more koiches. So this is the meaning of the pasuk Yaser Yisrani Yudke. Why Yaser Yisrani Yudke? Because it's Einim Musaf. It's only the first 2 letters of Hashem's name. The Tchilas Hashem, Tchilas is Galusei. Sha'adayin le'bala begilu. Ve'einim Musaf. Sha'adayin le'nizda la'akah. And here comes a whole biur about Nochum Ish Gamzu, which also that's a Machtzedek has a few pages on. A whole arichas. It wasn't even opened. Who's going to take it? Shmuel, you're going to take it home?
I go with you to gym.
Yossi, you'll take it home?
My kids are, I only have a little one, this is going to be a waste.
It's not a seder. Zeo inyan nochum ish
Next time,
gamzu.
tell him just two little ones. Are you coming back next week from the country?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe so, yeah. Nochum ish gamzu. Now, zu is revealed. Like Zeh. Right? So Nochum, Shehoya Eimer Gamzu L'Teiv. Why? Because he had Meichen the Gadlus. Mipnei Shehoya Mizbeinen the Emes. Shesherish Hara Hu HaTeiv. Ve'eviyeh L'maylo El Shorshoy L'mokim Ayin. V'shom Hoya Yochel Lasis Hishtanus. K'maymer Rav Chanina ben Daisa. Misha Amar Lashem and V'yad L'chulu. You know? So now Chometz will burn. And that's where the sand became arrows. From that mucker. V'zeu inyan hatfila. That's the idea of davening, and that's why it takes a long time, the inyan of davening. For a person to say, how could my life circumstances allow me to serve Hashem? Everything that I see gets in the way. I don't see how this gets me to serve Hashem. Shebegufa adam ba'ilam hazeh shaneshama b'teich haguf sevelas tzoros v'yisurim. Life is difficult. It's full of suffering. Sheretzeina lidavik b'yitzra. We're not talking about suffering that we don't have money. The Alter Rebbe is speaking about on a very high level. He wants to be close to Hashem. V'aguf einem menicha. The guf doesn't allow. We can make goals hashchine. Shebuchrachas. Sorry, lahachya is gamar rishoyim. The Shechina has to keep alive rishoyim. Kach haneshama muchrachas lahachya is as a guf. That's it. The whole kavonoso, the purpose of the neshama in keeping the body alive, eino b'shvil atzma. It's not for itself, because the neshama wants to be an elam hazeh. Rak b'shvil lahales aguf meyafor. He wants to elevate the guf. He has a goal with the body, that the body should experience things at a higher level. V'tzorich levaroi kekesef b'yad hatzoyif. Kol ma sheyesh tarubes yeser tzorich levarer ulelabein belahav eish hayeser godel. This is what he's saying about davening. Davening is a fire, and the more coarse a person is, the more fire they need. Levarer aguf mi'ayetzer hara ulahaviyah al sharshay k'moshel ben hamelechim azay nahama. The more rather is tzarich lahafrid ayidei eish yeser gadol v'chazot b'tfila l'davik b'koiner. And that's what he's going to say now. Why is it that nowadays we have to daven? Why is davening so important? V'lachin b'bayis rishon shloi hoyo hara harbe loi hoyo tzrichin l'tfila b'his lahavos. You know, today they say everyone is addicted to something. You know, nowadays. Yeah, some people, they have to have a toothpick in their mouth. They walk around with cleaning their teeth with a wire. Everybody's got something. In Vayas edition,
I'm glad I'm not that.
That people weren't so attached. So they
weren't addicted to anything in the Vayas.
Everything they did was transforming the guf. Ayidei akarbonis, and that was dying, that was enough. But by sheni, schilus, how can I feel it? That time, tefillah was short. Was short. We nowadays tzrichim l'espalo yoser ve'yoser behislahavos moed. As time goes on, we got to spend 8 hours a day davening. Not because we're better people. It's so intense. You know, I say this about education. Years ago, when teachers never sat around 25 years ago discussing how they're going to reach another child. In other words, when we sat at lunchtime or, who spoke about kids? They just sat and schmoozed among each other, Then, now, today, everyone's busy. They're sharing a challenge, this, how do you, right? That's what he's saying. We have to put much more effort in.
But it was very challenging time first, because the leaders when they ran after every avoid the Zorah, like it was biggest time.
You mean the Vayas Rishon? They did a lot of avodah zarah.
I'm just going to say as an answer, it says that Avraham Avinu says he served Hashem his whole life, but he was also Aved Avodah Zarah. So I think the Rambam says that he served Avodah Zarah with truth. So because it was with truth, that's why it's counted as the time that he served Hashem.
True. I mean, like he's the source or
You're seeking the truth.
everything.
Yeah, in other words, all the other people, it says over there,
Faking.
they were faking. Avraham Avinu. And maybe you told me that.
And could you say the same about this, right? That's why we look up to him?
Yeah, it's not me to say. I think it's a Rishon. I think one of the Rishon, maybe it's the Rambam. ולברד רע אשר בקרבו, ולהביא אל שורשי, כמו של בן המלך הנזי נענה, שיחשב החייס של הרע המחייהו, you should think about, איך יש לי חייס, מהקדוש ברוך הוא. This, what keeps this alive? It's from the Eibishter. כי בלעדי לא היה יוכל לחייס, והקדוש ברוך הוא מחייהו, על דרך הנ"ל, because there's a purpose to strengthen his connection to Hashem, to intensify his Yiddishkeit. Im Kain, if it's there to intensify his Yiddishkeit, ein ra klal. V'chein kol ha'yisurim b'inyanei elu mazeh. K'shecheshev al derech hanal, when he thinks about this nekuda, yispordu kol pei alei oven. Just the fact that when I daven, it doesn't go away, let's say. But I'm davening with more intensity because of the physical challenge. Then the physical challenge itself is a positive thing. And that's why he says, Yispordu kopei alei oven. The doers of evil crumble. They fall apart. Uke'inyan nochem ish gamzu. Just like with nochem ish gamzu, gam kol hatzadikim hoyu al derech zeh. Rak nochem ish gamzu hoyu yochel l'shana yisam shocha milmayla l'mata. He could actually change it. He could reveal the source. Shahiyah nire be'emes l'mata shu tev b'gashmis. V'lachein nikar gamzu shahu musik. Saying, yeah, this too is also the Torah. Skip the few lines, the next column. Avakol atzadikim, afilu shoya machsheveisam al zeh haderech, even though their thinking was in this way, but hoya nishar l'mayla, they didn't have the power to reveal it. Kach k'mei shoya b'tchila, b'li musig ha'tevahu. Zeu inyan nechash ha'nachoshes. There are many more questions. I'll just, if you look at the psukim carefully, the Tzemach Tzedek points out that the pasuk calls it nechoshim srofim. He says, what's nechash? If it's two things, it should say usrofim. And then it says asay lecha sorof. It doesn't say asay lecha nechash. Why does it say asay lecha sorof? And then what did Moshe do? He made a nechash. So the Tzemach Tzedek says, Srofim are malachim, Srofim. The nechashim lemata were a result of the Srofim. He says that people, what do we see? We see people who are intensely connected to Hashem have very low tolerance. Not all people, but people that are mechen dekatnos, they have no tolerance for misbehavior. They're very... So he says, from the Srafim came the Nechashim. And what Moshe Rabbeinu was telling them is to open up your mind. Don't be...
That's in his Maamar about the Srafim?
Yeah. The Tzemach Tzedek has a biur on this.
Wow.
On this Maamar, the Tzemach Tzedek explains this whole...
So this piece was missing every time I learned this.
Right. The Tzemach Tzedek says that he wasn't there when the Alter Rebbe said the Maamar. He heard it from Chassidim and from two sources, whatever. It's in Derech Mitzvah. I'm sorry, it's in Eira Torah, in the Isofis. Those two things are missing: the Mechen Dekatnus, Mechen Degadlus. That dynamic, and then the Sraf. Yeah.
I wish he would have put it here. Okay,
That's why we got
questions,
footnotes. That the Nechash Nechoshes. place it on a nace, meaning, sheyetzorich lo lagbos hanochash lo mailo, umistaklim klape mailo keloimar, shelo yachshiv she'anochash nifra. Don't think that
A
the
nace is a
zoino,
post.
yeah, in other words, elevate, right? In other words, don't think that the zoino is not connected to the king. Im kein ura mamish v'nishara, and it's evil. Avo, k'sheyachshiv es hanochash ba'agbasi l'maylo b'shorshi, she'einu nifrid miti yizbarich. It's part of the Eibishter's plan. V'chayusa mishomhu, al derech mosh lazein ben amalach hama. Im kein, ein ra yered mil maylo. There's nothing evil, and that's why it was nechash, she'mishtana l'kama gvonim, hayidei ayin. I don't know, hayidei ayin. Right? In the color, it looks red, and it looks gold, and it looks brown. There are different colors. In other words, you see different elements. And then he says, "V'hamevin yoven." And let's finish here. I know it's a little bit shorter. I'm thinking, yeah?